holographic billboard hovering over the grime-streaked canopy of the salvage yard sputtered. The image of a smiling diplomat flickering into static before restabilizing. Jace Arden wiped a smear of hydraulic grease from his cheek and narrowed his eyes at the screen. The broadcast was unavoidable, projected onto the smog clouds of the Port Arrow gas giant station, turning the toxic orange haze into a canvas for state propaganda. 50 billion credits says that smile is fake, Jace muttered, twisting a wrench around a recalcitrant bolt on a stripped engine block. His drone, a hovering sphere of dented chrome named Hex, drifted over his shoulder. The drone's single blue optic dilated as it processed the audio. That is a statistically poor wager. Jace, the smile is likely a product of reconstructive biosculpting, costing approximately 200,000 credits. Therefore, it is physically real, even if the sentiment is fabricated. You ruin everything. Hex, you know that? I am programmed to assist. The drone chirped. Jace leaned back, his magnetic boots clanking against the hull of the scrap heap he was currently standing on. Around him, the salvage yard was a chaotic ballet of drifting metal. Ships that had seen better centuries floated in the microgravity, tethered by thick steel cables that hummed with tension. Scavengers in battered pressure suits flitted between the wrecks like remora fish, cutting, welding, and stealing. The news anchor's voice boomed across the localized audio channels, drowning out the hiss of Jace's plasma cutter. Today marks a historic moment for the Terran Coalition and the Illyrian Star Empire. Princess Ceres Illyria, the gem of the outer reaches, has departed the imperial capital. Her destination is the neutral ground of Station Ohm, where the Treaty of Kess will finally end 300 years of Cold War. Jace snorted. Peace. Peace was bad for business. War meant wreckage. War meant high-grade military tech drifting into the drift zones, ripe for a guy with low morals and high debt to scoop up. Peace meant patrols, regulations, and taxes. They are just going to find a new reason to shoot at each other in 6 months, Jace said, finally cracking the bolt loose. He pulled a pristine power coupler from the engine's gut. That is the only universal constant. Hex. Humans want land, and Illyrians want to be superior. Everything else is just noise. Incoming transmission, Hex announced, interrupting Jace's cynicism. Secure channel, encryption level, illegitimately high. Jace froze. He looked at the power coupler in his hand, then out at the dark expanse of space beyond the salvage yard lights. High encryption usually meant high risk, and high risk usually involved people who broke kneecaps for a living. Put it through. The holographic billboard vanished from his heads-up display, replaced by a text-only interface. No face. Smart. The message was brief. Derelict identified. Sector 4-9, near the drift edge. Illyrian heavy cruiser class. Running dark. No transponder. 50,000 credits for the nav core and anything else you can carry. You have 6 hours before the official salvage tugs pick up the ghost signal. 50,000. Jace stared at the number. 50,000 credits was not just payday. It was freedom. It was enough to pay off the syndicate loan shark who had been threatening to repossess Jace's lungs. It was enough to fix the hyperdrive on his ship, the Rustwing, so he could leave this miserable system forever. Is it a trap? Jace asked. Probability is 42%, Hex replied. However, my sensors detect a faint energy signature consistent with a drifting capital ship in that vector. It is fresh wreckage. Jace. Jace looked at the coupler in his hand. It was worth maybe 300 credits. Prep the ship, Jace said, holstering his wrench. We are going hunting. The Rustwing was an ugly ship. It looked less like a spacecraft and more like a collection of spare parts flying in close formation. But it was fast, and more importantly, it was small. Jace piloted it through the debris field of the drift with the ease of a man who had spent more of his life in zero gravity than under a sky. The silence of deep space was heavy as they approached Sector 49. The neon glare of the station was far behind them now, replaced by the crushing dark. There. Hex whispered over the comms, though whispering was unnecessary. Target confirmed. Illyrian warship. Void's Lament class. Jace killed the engines and let momentum carry them forward. The ship drifted into view, blocking out the stars. It was a masterpiece of alien engineering. Unlike human ships, which were blocks of utilitarian gray steel, the Illyrian vessel was grown as much as it was built. It looked like a spear of obsidian and violet glass, sleek and curved, glowing with a faint, dying internal light. But it was dead. A massive tear ripped through the starboard hull, the edges of the metal frozen in an outward explosion. Debris glittered around it like a halo. No distress beacon, Jace noted, his hands dancing over the manual controls to bring the Rustwing into the shadow of the giant. That is not right. Illyrians scream for help on every frequency when they stub a toe. Perhaps the communications array was destroyed, Hex suggested, or someone wanted to make sure no one heard them scream. Jace muttered, "Stay with the ship. Hex, keep the engines hot and the sensors wide. If so much as a micrometeoroid sneezes in our direction, I want to know. I am offended you think I would do otherwise." Jace engaged his helmet seals. The hiss of pressurization filled his ears. He grabbed his heavy-duty cutter and a magnetic grapple gun, then cycled the airlock. Space was cold and silent. Jace floated across the gap between the two ships, his mag boots engaging with a metallic thud as he landed on the hull of the Illyrian cruiser. He walked up the side of the vessel, feeling the vibration of his own footsteps in his bones. He found an emergency maintenance hatch near the engine block. It was sealed, but Illyrian locks were based on harmonic resonance. Jace slapped a decoder onto the panel. The device hummed, cycling through frequencies until the lock clicked and the hatch hissed open, venting a puff of crystallized atmosphere. He dropped inside. The interior was a tomb. The emergency lighting was flickering, casting long, strobing shadows against the smooth, pearlescent walls. Gravity was offline, so Jace pushed off the bulkhead, floating down the central corridor. His helmet lights cut through the gloom, illuminating floating globules of coolant and blood. He passed a crew member. The body was frozen, suspended in midair. An Illyrian soldier, tall and slender, encased in armor that looked like spun glass. The face behind the visor was pale, almost translucent, with the sharp, angular features typical of the species. "No blast marks," Jace whispered. "Hex, are you reading this? I am monitoring your vitals. Jace, your heart rate is elevated. I am looking at a corpse with no wounds. The suit is intact. It looks like life support just stopped." Jace pushed deeper into the ship. He was looking for the bridge or the engineering deck. Somewhere he could rip out a memory core worth the 50,000 credits. But the layout of the ship was confusing. Illyrian architecture was organic, flowing. Corridors spiraled rather than turned. He drifted into a large circular chamber that wasn't on the standard schematics for a cruiser of this class. The walls were lined with intricate crystal conduits, all pulsing with a low, rhythmic thrum. It was warmer here. The air recyclers were still running. In the center of the room, anchored to the floor, was a pod. It was not a standard cryotube. It was a work of art. Gold filigree wrapped around a central casing of clear diamond glass. Inside, swirling mists of blue gas obscured the occupant. "Jackpot," Jace breathed. He floated toward it, his boots finding purchase on the deck plating. He tapped the glass. It was solid. "Hex, scan this." What am I looking at? Data transmission weak due to interference. Hex crackled. But energy signatures suggest Royal Transport Protocols. Jace, that is a stasis pod for high-value diplomatic assets. Jace's grin widened. Diplomatic assets meant tech, prototypes, maybe even Illyrian art. He could sell this whole unit to a collector in the core worlds and never work again. He wouldn't even have to open it, just detach the maglocks, float it to the rust wing, and disappear. He knelt by the base of the pod, pulling out his multi-tool. There was a control panel beneath a sliding cover. Alien glyphs glowed soft blue. Okay, beautiful, Jace muttered. Let us get you unhooked. He jammed a bypass shim into the data port. Usually this would trick the system into releasing the clamps. Instead, the room turned red. A low, grinding sound vibrated through the floor. The blue lights on the pod shifted to an angry, pulsing crimson. Warning, a melodic, artificial voice echoed through the chamber. The language was Illyrian, fluid and singing. Unauthorized access detected, a stasis containment compromised, emergency wake cycle initiated. No, no, no! Jace scrambled back, dropping his tool. Stop! Cancel! He mashed the keypad, but the alien interface ignored him. The gas inside the pod began to hiss and vent. The diamond glass cover split down the middle and retracted with the sound of sliding ice. Jace floated back, grabbing his plasma cutter, heart hammering against his ribs. If a royal guard popped out of that thing, he was going to have a very short negotiation. The mist cleared. Lying on the cushioned interior was not a soldier. It was a woman. She was terrifyingly beautiful, in the way a thunderstorm or a supernova was beautiful. Her skin was the color of moonlight, pale and luminous. Intricate patterns of bioluminescent markings traced along her arms and up her neck, glowing with a soft, rhythmic violet pulse. She wore ceremonial robes of white silk that floated weightlessly around her. Her eyes snapped open. They were solid violet, no whites, no pupils, just deep, endless wells of light. She gasped, a sound that sucked the oxygen out of the room. She sat up, her movements frantic, disoriented. She looked at her hands, then at the venting gas, and finally, her gaze landed on Jace. For a second, there was silence. Jace, hovering in his bulky, grease-stained scavenger suit, stared at the princess of the Illyrian Empire. "You are human," she whispered. The universal translator in Jace's helmet caught the words, though her lips moved in the complex shapes of her own tongue. "Yeah," Jace said, raising his hands slowly. "And you are awake. Look, I was just... Where is the fleet?" Her voice rose, sharp and commanding, though it trembled. "Where is General Kale? Why is the stasis offline?" Jace drifted closer, trying to project calm. "Listen, Your Highness, or whatever, the ship is dead. Everyone is dead. I found you in the dark." The princess's eyes widened. The bioluminescent markings on her skin flared brighter, shifting from calm violet to a jagged, anxious electric blue. "Dead?" she breathed. "No. That is impossible." She tried to stand, but the microgravity caught her off guard. She stumbled, floating upward. Jace instinctively reached out to grab her arm, to steady her. "I got you. Just..." His gloved hand brushed her forearm. Boom! The moment they touched, a shockwave of raw kinetic energy blasted outward from her skin. It hit Jace like a physical blow. He was thrown backward, slamming into the bulkhead hard enough to crack his visor. Sparks showered from the ceiling. The lights in the room exploded, plunging them into darkness save for the intense, blinding glow radiating from the princess. Jace groaned, floating in the dark, his ears ringing. His HUD flickered and died, Static washed over his vision before his helmet rebooted in emergency mode. Warning. His suit computer droned. External electrostatic discharge detected. Systems critical. He looked up. The princess was floating in the center of the room, clutching her chest. The metal plates of the floor beneath her were warping, bending like heated wax. The air smelled of ozone and burning copper. "What the hell was that?" Jace shouted, checking his suit integrity. "You almost fried my life support. I did not mean to," she yelled back. Her voice panicked. She looked at her own hands as if they were traitors. "It is the stress. The waking. It is too fast. My levels are—" She squeezed her eyes shut. The glowing tattoos on her skin were pulsing rapidly now. Erratic and jagged, the ship around them groaned. Gravity flickers tugged at Jace's stomach. Up, down, sideways. She was doing this. She was bending the artificial gravity just by panicking. Jace realized two things instantly. First, this woman was dangerous. Second, she was not just a VIP, she was a walking weapon. "You need to calm down," Jace said, keeping his distance this time. "You are overloading the ship's grid. If you blow the reactor, we both turn into stardust." "Who are you?" she demanded, staring at him with those terrifying, glowing eyes. "You are a scavenger, a thief. Did you do this? Did you kill my crew?" "I am the guy who just woke you up before your battery ran out," Jace snapped. "I didn't kill anyone. This ship has been drifting for days." Princess Ceres Illyria looked around the ruined chamber. The reality of her situation seemed to settle on her. Her glow dimmed slightly, the gravity stabilizing. "I was traveling to Ohm," she said, her voice shaking. "For the treaty. If the ship was attacked." She looked at Jace, her expression hardening into something imperious. "We must contact the High Command. You have a ship? You must signal the Imperial fleet immediately." "Lady, if I signal the Imperial fleet, they will vaporize me for just looking at you," Jace said. "I am a human salvager standing over a missing princess. Do you know what that looks like? It looks like a kidnapping. Then take me to them," she commanded. "I will ensure you are compensated." "Compensated?" Jace laughed, a harsh, dry sound. "I was going to sell your pod for parts. I don't want a reward. I want to live." Suddenly, a red light began to flash on the wall, a proximity alarm. Jace's helmet radio crackled to life. It was Hex. "Jace, urgent! Multiple contacts detected. They just dropped out of stealth. They are docking. Hard seal on the port airlock." "Who is it?" Jace asked, pushing off the wall and grabbing his cutter. "Salvage teams?" "Negative," Hex replied. "Signatures match Illyrian special operations, but—" "Jace, they are using human mercenary frequencies. It is a mixed team," Jace cursed. "A mixed team? That shouldn't exist. Humans and Illyrians didn't work together, unless they were black ops, unless they were the ones who wrecked this ship in the first place." "They are here to finish the job," Jace said, looking at Ceres. The princess was floating there, her light pulsing softly. "Who is here?" "The people who killed your crew," Jace said grimly. "And if they find you, I am guessing they are not going to ask for an autograph." The sound of cutting lasers vibrated through the hull. Heavy rhythmic thuds echoed down the corridor. Mag boots, a lot of them. "We have to go," Jace said. "Now." "I will not run with a thief," Ceres declared, lifting her chin. "I am the daughter of the seventh moon. I will command them to stand down." "You do that, and they will put a bolt through your head," Jace snapped. He grabbed a piece of floating debris and shoved it toward her. "Look at the wall. Look at the scorch marks. This wasn't an accident. Someone wanted this ship dead." Ceres looked at the damage. She hesitated. The arrogance in her face cracked, revealing a terrified young woman beneath the royal mask. "They are coming!" Hex shouted in Jace's ear. "They are breaching the inner door." Jace didn't wait for permission. He fired his grapple gun at the far exit. "Move or die, princess." The door behind them exploded inward. Metal shrapnel sprayed the room. Jace dove, tackling Saris, this time bracing for the shock. Her energy flared again, a hot, static whip that stung his skin even through the suit. But he held on, using his momentum to carry them both into the service tunnel. Laser fire stitched the air where they had been floating a second ago. They tumbled into the narrow, dark corridor. Jace kicked off the wall, dragging Saris behind him. "Let go of me," she cried, struggling. He released her, spinning around to fire his plasma cutter at the door controls. He welded the locking mechanism shut. It wouldn't hold them forever, but it would buy them seconds. "Run!" Jace yelled. They scrambled through the zero-gravity labyrinth. Saris was clumsy in the weightlessness, her robes billowing around her, tangling in her limbs. Jace moved with practiced efficiency, grabbing handholds and swinging through tight turns. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit were getting louder. These weren't clumsy pirates. These were soldiers. Human voices mixed with the sharp, clicking language of the Illyrians. "Check the vents. Leave no witnesses. The target must be neutralized." Saris heard it. She stopped, grabbing a handrail, her face pale. "Neutralized?" she whispered. "They are my own people." "Your own people are working with human mercs," Jace said, checking his power levels. "Welcome to politics. Now move." They reached a junction. A soldier in sleek black armor dropped from a ceiling hatch in front of them. He raised a rifle. Jace didn't have a weapon, just a tool. He raised the cutter, but he was out of range. The soldier leveled the gun at Saris. "No!" Jace shouted. Saris reacted on instinct. She screamed. It wasn't just a sound, it was a release. The bioluminescence on her skin went white-hot. A wave of distorted air erupted from her body. The shockwave hit the soldier. It didn't push him back, it crumpled his armor. The rifle exploded in his hands. The gravity in the corridor inverted violently, slamming the soldier into the ceiling with a sickening crunch. The lights in the hallway burst. Sparks rained down like fireworks. Jace had to magnetize his boots to the floor to keep from being thrown into the walls. He looked at Saris. She was panting, her hands trembling, the glow fading back to a dull, exhausted violet. She looked at the broken soldier, then at Jace. I did not mean." "Save the apology," Jace said, staring at the twisted metal of the ceiling. "Keep doing that." "I cannot control it," she gasped. It hurts less than being dead." Jace grabbed her arm again. "We are close to the airlock." They sprinted, or floated and kicked, toward the docking ring. The ship was shaking now. The attackers were setting charges. They intended to blow the evidence. "My ship is right there." Jace pointed to the open airlock at the end of the hall. More soldiers appeared at the far end of the corridor. Laser bolts hissed past them, scorching the walls. One grazed Jace's shoulder plate, spinning him around. He shoved Saris into the airlock tube. "Get inside." He slammed the panel, cycling the airlock. As the pressure normalized, he dragged her into the cramped, greasy cockpit of the Rust Wing. "Hex! Get us out of here!" Jace yelled, throwing himself into the pilot's seat. "Engine warm-up at 80%, Hex replied. "We are still tethered. Blow the clamps." Jace strapped in. Saris floated behind him, grabbing the back of his chair, her eyes wide as she took in the chaotic, rusted interior of the salvage ship. "This is your vessel?" she asked, horrified. "It is a trash can. It is a fast trash can." Jace slammed the throttle forward. The explosive bolts on the docking clamps fired. The Rust Wing lurched free of the massive Illyrian warship. Jace spun the ship around, the G-force slamming them into their seats. On the rear monitor, the Void's Lament was surrounded by 3 sleek predatory attack craft. They are locking missiles, Hex warned. Hold on. Jace banked hard, diving toward the debris field of the gas giant's rings. Behind them, the derelict warship vanished in a silent, blinding blossom of white light. The attackers had detonated the reactor. The shockwave caught the tiny rustwing, tumbling it end over end. Alarms screamed, metal groaned. Jace fought the stick, his teeth gritted. Stabilizers. Hex! Route all power to the rear shields. Ceres cried out, sliding across the deck until she hit the wall. Her glow flared again, flickering with her fear. "Don't you explode on me now, princess!" Jace yelled over the roaring engines. "Or I will turn this car around." He dove into the thickest part of the ice ring, weaving between spinning asteroids. The sensors showed the pursuit breaking off. The attackers assumed the explosion or the debris field would finish the job. Minutes passed. The shaking stopped. The silence returned. Jace slumped in his chair, exhaling a breath he felt like he had been holding for an hour. He checked the readouts. They were alive, leaking oxygen, burning fuel like crazy. But alive. He unbuckled and spun his chair around. Princess Ceres was huddled in the corner of the cockpit, her knees pulled to her chest. Her ceremonial robes were torn, stained with grease. Her bioluminescence was dim, pulsing with a slow, weak rhythm. She looked small. Jace looked at her, then at the empty space where his 50,000 credit salvage run used to be. He was broke. He was damaged. And now he was a kidnapper with a target on his back. "Great," Jace muttered to the empty air. "Just great." He looked at the princess. "So," he said, his voice flat, "coffee?" The air recycler on the Rustwing was fighting a losing battle against the scent of burnt ozone, stale coffee, and the pungent chemical tang of high-stress fear. Jace Arden sat in the pilot's seat, his boots propped up on the console, staring at the holographic star chart that was currently informing him he was lost, broke, and a fugitive. Behind him, pacing the cramped confines of the flight deck like a tiger in a crate, was the princess of the Illyrian Empire. "You live like this by choice?" Ceres asked, her voice tight with a mixture of horror and aristocratic disdain. "There is grease on the ceiling. I did not think gravity allowed grease to reach the ceiling." "It is a salvage hauler, Your Highness." "Not a pleasure yacht," Jace snapped, swiping a notification away from his display without looking back. "And for the record, the grease adds structural integrity." "You kidnapped me," she accused, stopping her pacing to glare at the back of his head. Jace spun the chair around, the metal bearings groaning in protest. "I rescued you," he corrected, pointing a grease-stained finger at her. "There is a distinct legal difference. Rescue implies gratitude. Kidnapping implies I actually want you here. Which, looking at my fuel gauge and my blood pressure, I definitely do not." "Gratitude?" Ceres laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that made the bioluminescent markings on her neck flare a warning shade of indigo. "You triggered my wake cycle prematurely, destroyed my stasis pod, and dragged me onto a ship that smells like wet dog and copper wire. You have effectively stolen a state asset." "Asset," Jace repeated, shaking his head. "You talk about yourself like you are a piece of furniture. Look, if you want to go back to that drifting tomb and wait for the bad guys to finish the job, the airlock is right there. Be my guest." Ceres faltered. The anger drained out of her posture, leaving her looking small and incredibly tired. Her ceremonial silk robes were torn at the hem, ruined by the dirty grate flooring of the Rustwing. She hugged her arms around herself, her glowing eyes fixing on the floor. "I cannot go back," she whispered, "and I cannot arrive late." Jace sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He was too old for this. He was 34, which in scavenger years was basically ancient. "Okay," Jace said, softening his tone slightly. Talk to me. Why is a princess packed in a crate like frozen fish? And why did a death squad want to turn you into space dust? Saris hesitated, looking at him with deep suspicion. Then, she seemed to realize she had no other options. She moved to the co-pilot seat and sat down gingerly, as if afraid the upholstery might bite her. "The Treaty of Kess," she said. "You saw the news?" "The peace deal," Jace said. "Earth and Elira holding hands and singing songs." "I saw it. It is not just a treaty," Saris said, staring out the viewport at the streaking stars. "It is a binding, a soul bonding. In my culture, a treaty of this magnitude requires a biological exchange of trust. A political marriage, you would call it." Jace raised an eyebrow. "Marriage? To who?" "General Varos," she said, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. "He is the supreme commander of the southern fleets, a ruthless tactician. He burned the colony of New Vega to the ground 10 years ago." "And you are going to marry him?" Jace asked, disgust curling his lip. "I am going to stop the war," Saris corrected sharply. "My bio-neural signature is unique. When I bond with him, our energy fields will synchronize. It is a ceremonial surrender of my autonomy to ensure the ceasefire holds. If I do not arrive at the summit in 3 days to complete the ritual, the treaty is void, the war resumes, and billions die." Jace stared at her. She wasn't a diplomat. She was a sacrifice. "That is barbaric," Jace muttered. "They are trading you like a literal battery to keep the lights on." "It is duty," Saris said, lifting her chin, though her voice wavered. A concept a scavenger might find difficult to grasp. Before Jace could retort, the ship's AI, Hex, chimed in from the ceiling speakers, interrupting emotional tension. Hex announced, "Incoming hail, wideband frequency. It is an Illyrian patrol cruiser, class Vindicator." Jace let out a breath. Finally. "Okay, Your Highness, your taxi is here. I will hand you over. You can explain I am the good guy, and I can go back to being poor and anonymous." He reached for the comms panel. "Wait!" Saris lunged forward, grabbing his wrist. Her skin was hot, feverishly so, and a spark of static electricity jumped from her fingers, stinging Jace's arm. "Ouch!" "Watch the voltage." Jace pulled back. "Show me the insignia," Saris commanded, ignoring him. "Put it on the screen." Jace grumbled but tapped a key. The main view screen flickered, displaying the sleek, predatory profile of the approaching warship. On its hull, a stylized emblem glowed in crimson light, a clenched fist inside a sun. Saris went pale. Her bioluminescence turned a terrified, icy white. "Do not answer that hail," she whispered. "Why?" Jace asked, confused. "That is the Imperial Navy. Your escort? That is the Obsidian Guard," Saris said, her voice trembling. "My uncle's personal legion, Lord Regent Kale. He has publicly opposed the treaty for years. If his ships are here, they are not looking for a survivor. They are looking for a corpse." "Hex!" Jace barked. "Scan their weapon systems. Weapons are hot," Hex replied instantly. "Target lock detected." "They are painting us, Jace. They are not asking for a license and registration." Jace swore, a colorful string of curses that spanned 3 languages. He slammed the throttle forward. The Rustwing groaned, the engines kicking from idle to full burn in a heartbeat. "Hang on," Jace yelled. The ship lurched. On the screen, the Illyrian cruiser opened fire. Green lances of plasma tore through the space where the Rustwing had been a second before. "Where are we going?" Saris shouted, gripping the armrests of her chair so hard the leather cracked. Jace's hands flew across the controls. The nav computer showed a massive structure ahead, the Ring of Solara. It was a chaotic, sprawling orbital trade hub. a dense ring of habitats, factories, and docking pylons orbiting a brown dwarf star. It was crowded, dirty, and full of obstacles. "Into the mud," Jace said, banking the ship hard to the left. "We cannot outrun a cruiser in open space when we have to lose them in the traffic." The Rustwing dove toward the station. The view screen filled with the blinding neon clutter of the trade ring. Thousands of ships moved in orchestrated lanes, freighters, mining barges, shuttles. Jace ignored the lanes entirely. He punched the ship through a gap in the traffic shield, skimming the hull of a massive ore refinery. "Proximity alert," Hex warned calmly. "You are currently flying within 5 meters of a fusion exhaust vent. This is ill-advised." "Shut up!" "Hex!" Jace yelled, jerking the stick to avoid a cargo drone. Behind them, 3 smaller interceptor fighters launched from the Illyrian cruiser. They were fast, sleek, and shaped like knives. They sliced through the traffic, blowing civilian drones out of their way. "They are gaining," Saris cried, looking at the rear monitors. "I know," Jace snapped. "I can't shake them. They have better thrust-to-weight ratios." A plasma bolt clipped the Rustwing's shield generator. The cockpit shook violently. Sparks rained down on Jace's lap. "I need a distraction." Jace looked at Saris. "Can you do the thing?" "What thing?" "The spooky flashbang thing. The overload." "I told you I cannot control it," Saris yelled, her eyes wide. "It reacts to stress." "Well, are you not stressed?" Jace shouted as he spiraled the ship into a narrow maintenance trench that ran along the spine of the station. "Look at us. We are dying." One of the interceptors dropped into the trench behind them, lining up a shot. "Do it!" Jace roared. "Just aim it at them." Saris unbuckled her straps. She stood up, bracing herself against the dashboard. She closed her eyes, and Jace saw the veins in her neck bulge. The markings on her skin began to strobe, a violent, chaotic rhythm. The air in the cockpit grew heavy, charged with static. The hairs on Jace's arms stood up. She screamed, not of fear this time, but of effort. She thrust her hand toward the rear bulkhead. A pulse of violet energy, visible even to the naked eye, erupted from the Rustwing. It passed through the hull without damaging it but slammed into the pursuing interceptor. The alien fighter didn't explode, it just died. Its engines cut out instantly, its lights went dark. The pilot, losing control, slammed into the wall of the trench, spinning away in a cloud of debris. "Got him!" Jace cheered. Saris collapsed back into her seat, gasping for air. Blood trickled from her nose. Jace glanced at her, his triumph vanishing. She looked gray. The light in her skin had dimmed to a faint, sickly pulse. "2 more on our tail," Hex announced. Jace gritted his teeth. He dove the ship into an atmospheric processing duct. It was an insane maneuver. The duct was meant for gas venting, filled with thick, corrosive smog. Visibility dropped to 0. "Sensor blindness," Hex noted. "Perfect," Jace said. "If I can't see them, they can't see me." He cut the main engines, letting the ship drift on momentum, using the thick smog to mask their heat signature. He guided the Rustwing with minute bursts of maneuvering thrusters, sliding into a dark, recessed maintenance bay used for derelict repair. He hit the landing gear release. The ship settled onto the deck with a heavy metallic clang. Silence returned to the cockpit, save for the hum of the cooling systems and Saris's ragged breathing. Jace unbuckled and scrambled over to her. Hey, are you with me?" Saris was slumped over, her head resting on the dashboard. He reached out to check her pulse, but hesitated. "It is safe," she rasped, her voice weak. "The surge is gone." He touched her neck. Her skin was burning up. Her pulse was racing, thumping against his fingertips like a trapped bird. "You are burning up," Jace said, grabbing a water ration from the survival kit under his seat. He cracked the seal and handed it to her. "Drink." She took it with shaking hands. He noticed the intricate bioluminescent lines on her fingers were dark, like burnt-out filaments. That energy, Jace said quietly, watching her drink. It is not just a defense mechanism, is it? It eats you. Saris lowered the pouch, wiping her mouth. It is a bio-neural core, an artificial organ implanted in my lineage for generations. It converts emotion into raw energy. Fear becomes kinetic force. Anger becomes heat. Sorrow becomes gravity. And if you use too much, Jace asked. Then the core consumes the host, she said simply. It burns out the nervous system. We call it the hollow death. It is why I have been trained since birth to suppress my feelings, to be a statue, to be perfect. She looked at him, her violet eyes haunted. Today, with you, I have felt more fear and anger in 3 hours than I have in 20 years. If I keep overloading, I will not survive to reach the summit. Jace sat back on his heels, the cynicism draining out of him. He looked at the girl, the woman sitting in his co-pilot chair. She wasn't an arrogant royal. She was a kid with a bomb sewn into her chest, raised to believe that feeling anything would kill her. He thought about the engine block he was fixing earlier. How easy it was to replace a part. People weren't like that. I used to build systems like that, Jace said suddenly. The words came out before he could stop them. Saris looked at him, surprised by the admission. You were an engineer? Military systems engineer, first class. Terran Coalition, Jace said, staring at the floor. I designed guidance chips for orbital bombardment platforms. Smart tech, efficient. Why are you a scavenger now? Saris asked. Because I found out what efficient looks like, Jace said, his voice hard. We hit a mining colony on the fringe. Intelligence said it was a rebel stronghold. My chips guided the payloads perfectly, and then within 3 meters of the target, he looked up at her. It wasn't a stronghold. It was a school. The intel was faked by a corporation that wanted the mining rights. They wiped out 400 kids to lower the stock price of a competitor. Saris covered her mouth, her eyes widening. I quit the next day, Jace said. Deserted, actually. I figured if I was going to work with machines, I wanted to work on broken ones, things that had already been destroyed. At least with salvage. You are not killing anyone. You are just picking up the pieces. He stood up, pacing the small cockpit again, unable to sit still with the memory. I swore I would never get involved in their wars again, Jace said. And now, here I am, dragging a walking superweapon through a ventilation shaft. Saris watched him. For the first time, she didn't look at him with disdain. She looked at him with recognition. We are not so different. Jace Arden, she said softly. You ran away from a system that used you as a tool. I am running toward one, hoping I can change it before it destroys me. Jace stopped pacing. He looked at her, really looked at her, and felt a dangerous twinge in his chest. It wasn't attraction, not yet, but it was respect. And respect was the first step toward getting killed. Incoming transmission. Hex interrupted, shattering the moment. Priority 1. Encrypted channel. Source, the Shadow Broker Network. Jace frowned. That is my contact. Why is he pinging me now? Put it on audio, Jace commanded. The voice that filled the cockpit was distorted, metallic and cold. Jace, you have heat, serious heat. A generic bounty just hit the boards. 50 million credits. The target is the Illyrian cargo you picked up. 50 million? Jace whistled low. That is enough to buy a moon. There is a catch, the voice continued. The contract specifies condition. Deceased. They do not want the asset returned. Jace, they want biological confirmation of death. DNA sequence and the core. If you bring her in breathing, you get nothing. Jace froze. He looked at Saris. She hadn't moved. Sender is anonymous, the voice said, but the credits were routed through a shell company owned by Ares Dynamics, and the authorization code. It is Illyrian High Command syntax. Ares Dynamics, Jace whispered. The biggest human arms manufacturer in the sector. And Illyrian command codes, Saris added, her voice devoid of hope. The transmission ended. Jace leaned against the console, crossing his arms. So, let us recap. A human megacorporation that makes money from war. And your uncle, the regent who hates peace, are working together. They want the treaty to fail, Saris realized, the pieces falling into place. If I die, the Empire will blame Earth. The regent will declare war in retaliation. Ares Dynamics gets to sell weapons to the humans, and my uncle gets to seize the throne permanently. And you are the loose end, Jace said. Saris stood up. Her legs were shaky, but her face was set in stone. We have to go to the capital, she said. Jace laughed, a sharp, incredulous bark. Did you hit your head? We just found out everyone wants you dead, and you want to go to the one place where all of them are gathering? It is the only way, Saris insisted, stepping toward him. The Peace Summit is on the capital megastructure. The central data core is there. If my uncle is conspiring with humans, the proof will be in the archives. We need to expose him. We need to run. Jace argued. We can go to the Outer Rim, hide on a smuggler moon. And let the war start? Saris asked. Let billions die like those children in the school you bombed? The words hung in the air like a slap. Jace flinched. He stared at her, jaw working. That was a low blow. Princess, it is the truth, Saris said, her eyes blazing with that terrifying violet light again. You ran away once. Jace, you can run again, but I cannot. My body is a weapon, yes. But my life has to mean something more than just a fuse for a war. She took a breath, steadying herself. I am going to the capital, with or without you. Jace looked at her. He looked at the torn robes, the defiant set of her jaw, the trembling hands she was trying to hide. He looked at the readout on his console showing the bounty. If she went alone, she would be dead in an hour. He cursed softly. He looked at Hex's sensor dome. Hex, calculate a route to the Illyrian capital. Minimal security profile. Probability of survival is less than 4%, Hex replied cheerfully. Never tell me the odds, Jace muttered. He sat back down in the pilot's chair and began flipping switches. The Rustwing's engines hummed to life, vibrating the deck plates. You are crazy. You know that? Jace said, not looking at her. I have been told, Saris said, a small, tired smile touching her lips as she sat back down. Jace engaged the thrusters, and the battered salvage ship lifted off the deck, turning away from the safety of the shadows and heading toward the heart of the enemy empire. Buckle up, princess, Jace grumbled. We are going to crash a wedding. Alara Prime Orbital was not a space station. It was a jewel suspended in the velvet throat of the cosmos. As the Rustwing limped out of hyperspace, the view screen filled with a lattice of spun crystal and white alloy that dwarfed the imagination of any human architect. Rings of verdant habitation domes rotated slowly around a central spire that pierced the darkness like a diamond needle. It was beautiful. It was intimidating. And it was crawling with the most sophisticated security grid in the galaxy. We are going to stick out like a sore thumb, Jace muttered, his hands dancing over the console to dampen the Rustwing's thermal signature. Look at that traffic. He pointed to the stream of ships flowing toward the docking pylons. They were sleek, silver yachts, gilded diplomatic barges and courier vessels that looked like liquid mercury. The Rustwing, with its patched hull and erratic engine vibration, looked like a garbage truck crashing a coronation. "I have uploaded the transponder codes," Saris said. She was standing behind his chair, her eyes scanning the data streams. "They identify us as a maintenance tender for House Vane, a minor noble family from the Outer Rim. They are known for being frugal. A battered ship will not seem out of place for them." "Frugal," Jace snorted. "That is a polite way of saying cheap. I like it." He guided the ship into the queue, sweating as the station's automated traffic control pinged them. The silence in the cockpit stretched for 10 agonizing seconds. Then, the comms panel chirped a green light. "Clearance granted," Hex announced. "Docking Bay 94 in the lower logistics ring." Jace exhaled, slumping slightly. "We are in. Now comes the hard part." He spun his chair around. Saris was already pulling a small metallic device from a hidden compartment in her robes. It was a holographic mesh emitter, illegal in 3 systems and highly restricted in the rest. "I cannot walk through the station looking like this," Saris said, gesturing to the glowing violet markings that traced the line of her throat and vanished beneath her collar. "Every guard on the station has been briefed to look for the royal markings." "I know," Jace said. He stood up, taking the emitter from her. It was shaped like a thin silver choker. "But this thing is tricky. You have to sync it to your biorhythm, or it will glitch every time your heart rate spikes. Given your condition, that is a problem. I need you to calibrate it," Saris said quietly. She turned her back to him, sweeping her long, pale hair over one shoulder to expose the nape of her neck. Jace froze. The request was practical, but the intimacy of it hit him like a physical weight. In Illyrian culture, the neck was a vulnerable, guarded point. He stepped closer. The air between them felt charged, smelling of ozone and the faint floral scent of her skin. "Hold still," Jace murmured. He reached out, his hands, rough and scarred from years of wrenching scrap metal, hovered for a second before touching her skin. She was warm, terrifyingly warm. The bioneural energy humming beneath her flesh made his fingertips tingle. He clasped the choker around her neck. Her skin flinched at the cold metal, and he felt a tremor run through her body. "Is it too tight?" Jace asked, his voice sounding lower than usual in the quiet cockpit. "No," Saris breathed. Her head was bowed, exposing the delicate curve of her spine. "Just hurry." Jace activated the device. He had to lean in close, his face inches from her shoulder, to adjust the micro settings on the clasp. He could see the pulse beating rapidly in her neck. He could feel the radiant heat of the core inside her. For a moment, he wasn't thinking about the mission or the bounty or the war. He was thinking about how fragile she looked, despite the power she held. He tapped the final sequence. A shimmer of light washed over her skin. The glowing violet tattoos vanished, replaced by the illusion of smooth, unblemished pale skin. The luminescence in her eyes dimmed to a standard, human-like brown. "There," Jace said, stepping back quickly, needing to put space between them. "You look normal, like a regular aide." Saris turned around. She touched her neck, her eyes searching his face. She looked almost disappointed that the moment was over, though she quickly masked it with a mask of efficiency. "Thank you," she said stiffly. "Now, let us find out why my uncle wants me dead." The lower decks of Elira Prime were a sensory assault. Unlike the pristine, silent upper towers where the diplomats sipped nectar, the logistics ring was a chaotic, neon-drenched labyrinth. It was where the station breathed. Steam hissed from vents in the floor. Holographic advertisements for gambling dens and spice markets flickered in the smoky air. Hundreds of species mingled here. Hulking reptilian dock workers shouldered past floating jellyfish-like traders in containment suits. The noise was a deafening mix of a dozen languages, the clang of metal, and the thumping bass of music spilling from cantinas. Jace and Saris moved through the crowd. Jace wore a nondescript technician's jumpsuit, a tool belt slung low on his hips. Saris wore a simple gray tunic she had found in Jace's emergency locker, the hollow mesh hiding her royalty. She walked with a natural grace that threatened to blow her cover every 10 steps. People moved out of her way instinctively, parting like water. "You have to slouch," Jace whispered, nudging her arm. "You walk like you own the hallway." "I cannot help my posture," Saris hissed back, though she tried to hunch her shoulders. "And why is the floor sticky?" "Do not ask," Jace advised. He steered them toward a food stall that smelled like roasted spices and burning tires. His stomach growled. They hadn't eaten since the Rustwing left the salvage yard. 2 skewers of whatever that is, Jace told the 4-armed vendor, tossing a credit chip onto the counter. The vendor handed him 2 sticks of charred, purple meat. Jace took a bite and immediately regretted every life choice that had led him to this moment. It tasted like battery acid and chili peppers. He coughed, his eyes watering, divine, truly excellent. Saris took her skewer, sniffed it delicately, and took a small bite. She chewed thoughtfully while Jace wheezed. "It is seasoned with crawl root," she noted. "It is a delicacy in the southern systems, though it is usually served with a neutralizing agent to prevent esophageal burns. You could have told me that before I ate it." Jace gasped, wiping tears from his eyes. "You did not ask," Saris said, a small, mischievous smirk tugging at the corner of her disguised mouth. For a second, amidst the grime and the noise, they were just 2 people sharing a bad meal. Jace looked at her, the fake brown eyes, the gray tunic, the grease smudge she had accidentally picked up on her sleeve, and smiled. "We are getting close to the lift," Saris said, her expression sobering as she checked a data pad she had swiped from the ship. "The archive node is on level 40. It is a restricted zone for administrative traffic only." "Do you have the access keys?" Jace asked, discarding the rest of his spicy death stick. "I memorized the Regent's override codes when I was a child," Saris said. "He used to take me there to show me the history of our conquests. He thought he was teaching me pride. He was actually teaching me his passwords." They slipped into a service elevator, sharing it with a maintenance droid that beeped mournfully at them. As the lift rose, leaving the noise of the market behind, the atmosphere shifted. The walls became cleaner, whiter. The air grew cold and sterile. Level 40. The doors slid open to reveal a long, pristine corridor lined with data ports. Security drones hovered near the ceiling, their red optical sensors sweeping back and forth. Saris stepped out, confident. She walked to the nearest console, a sleek pillar of obsidian glass. "Connect your data pad," she commanded Jace. "I will input the override." Jace plugged in. Saris placed her hand on the interface surface. Her fingers moved in a complex, rhythmic pattern, tapping out the code. The console hummed. A blue light flashed. Then, abruptly, it turned angry red. "Access denied." A mechanical voice intoned, "Authorization revoked. User ID, Saris Illyria listed as deceased." Saris pulled her hand back as if burned. "He revoked them," she whispered. "He declared me dead before the body was even found." "That confirms it," Jace said, unhooking his pad. "He didn't just want you gone. He erased you." "We need another way in," Saris said, her voice rising in panic. "The main vault is down the hall. If we cannot access the remote nodes, we have to go to the physical terminal inside the vault." And how do we do that? Jace asked, eyeing the security drones. Ask nicely? No, Sarah said, straightening her spine. Her eyes flashed with a sudden idea. We use the one thing he cannot revoke, my attitude. She turned to Jace. You are my technician, and you are incompetent. Follow my lead. Before Jace could ask what she meant, Sarah strode down the hallway toward the massive blast doors of the central data vault. 2 Illyrian guards in full ceremonial armor stood watch. They crossed their shock pikes as she approached. Halt, one guard barked. This is a restricted area. Do not speak to me. You walking tin can, Sarah shouted, her voice echoing off the walls. She pointed a finger at the guard's face. Open this door immediately. The guard blinked, taken aback. Citizen, you have no clearance. I am Lady Vane's personal assistant, Sarah lied, her voice dripping with entitlement. And this idiot, she gestured violently at Jace, dropped her ladyship's ancestral hololocket down a maintenance vent. The tracker says it is in your ventilation intake inside that vault. She whirled on Jace. Tell them, you clumsy oaf. Tell them how you lost a priceless heirloom because you have thumbs like sausages. Jace stared at her for a split second, impressed by the performance. He slumped his shoulders, adopting the look of a man who had been yelled at for 6 hours straight. I am sorry, Jace mumbled, looking at his feet. It slipped. The vent was open. I just want to get it back so she stops screaming at me. The guards exchanged a look. They knew the reputation of the minor nobility. Petty, loud, and impossible to silence. If we do not get that locket, Sarah shrieked, advancing on the guard, Lady Vane will file a formal complaint with the regent himself. Do you want to explain to Lord Kale why his afternoon was ruined by a missing necklace? The guard sighed. The threat of bureaucratic paperwork was often more terrifying than a blaster. 5 minutes, the guard grunted, and do not touch the servers. The blast doors hissed open. Saris marched inside, nose in the air. Jace shuffled after her, mumbling apologies to the guards. As soon as the doors sealed behind them, Saris dropped the act. She leaned against the wall, letting out a shaky breath. Thumbs like sausages, Jace whispered, grinning. That was harsh. It worked, Saris said, pushing off the wall. The main terminal is there. The vault was a cavernous room filled with towering pillars of crystal, each one pulsing with light. This was the memory of the Empire. Every treaty, every battle plan, every secret. Saris ran to the central interface. She didn't need codes this time. She needed a direct link. She placed both hands on the crystal surface. Her eyes glowed, fighting against the contact lenses of the disguise. She was interfacing directly with the machine, using her bio-neural core to bypass the encryption. It hurt. Jace could see it. Her body tensed, her jaw clenched. I am in, she gasped, searching for encrypted files. Keyword, Earth. Keyword, Kale. Jace stood guard at the door, watching the progress bar on the screen. Here, Sarah said. Her voice went cold. Jace looked at the screen. It was a schematic, a tactical map of the Sol system. Red markers surrounded Earth. It is a phantom fleet, Saris explained, reading the data rapidly. They are not Illyrian ships. They are unmarked destroyers, built in secret shipyards. Kyle plans to assassinate me at the summit tomorrow. He will detonate a bomb, blame a human radical group, and then his phantom fleet will warp in and glass Earth's major cities in retaliation. Glass them? Jace asked, a chill running down his spine. Orbital bombardment, Saris said. Billions dead in an hour. He wants to wipe out humanity's leadership so the Empire can seize your resources without a fight. We have to copy this, Jace said. We have to show the summit. I am downloading it now, Saris said, but A siren began to wail. The room bathed in flashing red light. Biometric anomaly detected. The system roared. Unauthorized bioneural signature. Royal pattern recognized. The system recognized you, Jace yelled. I had to interface to get the data, Saris shouted back, pulling her hands from the crystal. The download is complete. The blast doors behind them began to cycle open. We can't go out that way, Jace said. The guards will shoot us on sight. He looked around. High above them, near the vaulted ceiling, was a maintenance hatch for the cooling systems. Up! Jace pointed. He fired his grapple gun at the rafters. The line caught. He grabbed Saris by the waist. Hold on. He triggered the retract mechanism. They flew upward just as the guards burst into the room, shock pikes crackling with lethal energy. Bolts of electricity sizzled through the air where they had been standing. They swung onto the high catwalk and scrambled through the hatch. They emerged onto the exterior of the station. The wind hit them first, not atmospheric wind, but the thin, howling gale of the station's atmospheric envelope generators. They were standing on a narrow service ledge, thousands of feet above the glowing ring of the habitat. Above them was the endless, star-strewn void. Below them, the dizzying drop to the lower decks. There! Jace yelled over the wind. An automated maintenance tram was rattling along a magnetic rail, moving between the towers. It was their only way off the spire. They ran along the ledge. The drop was terrifying. One slip and they would fall for 5 minutes before hitting the bottom. Drones! Saris screamed, pointing back. A swarm of security drones poured out of the hatch they had just exited. They looked like angry hornets made of chrome. Laser fire strafed the ledge, kicking up sparks. Jump! Jace commanded. They leaped from the ledge, falling through the open air for a heart-stopping second, before crashing onto the roof of the passing tram. The impact knocked the wind out of Jace. He grabbed Saris's hand to keep her from sliding off the curved surface. The drones were faster. They buzzed around the tram, firing. Jace pulled his plasma cutter, though it was useless at this range. Saris, stay low. One of the drones fired a concussive blast. It hit the tram's magnetic coupling. The tram lurched violently. The front lifted off the rail. Sparks showered them. The metal groaned, twisting. We are derailing, Jace shouted. The tram swung wild, smashing into a service pylon. The impact flung them off the roof. They fell into a dark, vertical exhaust shaft that ran down the side of the tower. They tumbled, bouncing off pipes and cables. Jace grabbed a bundle of wires, the friction burning his gloves, and caught Saris with his other arm. Their momentum swung them hard into a recessed alcove, a narrow space between two massive cooling panels. They crashed into the metal grating, tangled together. The shaft was dark, lit only by the flickering sparks from the damaged cables above. It was cramped. The walls were pressing in on them. Jace groaned, checking his limbs. Nothing broken. He looked at Saris. She was pinned beneath him, her back against the vibrating panel. Her eyes were wide, panicked. The hollow mesh around her neck had shorted out in the fall. The disguise failed. Her markings were back and they were blazing. Violet light flooded the tiny space, but it wasn't steady. It was pulsing, erratic, violent. The air around them began to hum. Saris? Jace said, realizing the danger instantly. She gasped, arching her back. Her hands clawed at his chest, gripping his jumpsuit. Get away, she choked out. Too close, too much. Adrenaline. She was overloading. The fear of the fall, the combat, the proximity. It was triggering the bioneural feedback loop. Jace tried to push back, but there was nowhere to go. The walls were inches away. He was pressed against her, chest to chest, hip to hip. He could feel the heat radiating from her core. It was searing, like standing next to an open furnace. The metal panels around them began to groan. The rivets popped. Her energy was warping the steel. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut. Tears streamed down her face. "Don't move, human. My body is overloading," she cried, her voice cracking. "It will kill you." She tried to push him away, but her strength was fading into the surge. The energy crackled between them, shocking Jace's skin. It hurt, but he didn't pull away. If he left her, she would detonate. She would burn herself out in this dark hole. Jace made a choice. He didn't pull back. He grabbed her wrists, pinning them gently to the grating to stop her from clawing at herself. He leaned his forehead against hers, forcing her to look at him. "Saris." "Look at me," Jace ordered, his voice cutting through her panic. "I cannot stop it," she sobbed. "It is too much." "Yes, you can," Jace said firmly. "Breathe with me. Ignore the energy. Look at my eyes, just my eyes." He took a deep, slow breath. In. Out. She stared at him, her violet eyes swimming with terror. The energy arced from her skin to his, burning his neck, his hands. He gritted his teeth against the pain. "I am not moving," Jace said softly. "I am right here. I am not leaving you to burn." "You will die," she whispered. "I am tough to kill," Jace said. "Now breathe. You are in control. Not the core. You..." He shifted his weight slightly, not to escape, but to settle over her protectively. He was mindful of every point of contact. "I am going to hold your hands," Jace said, his voice dropping to a soothing rumble. "Is that okay?" Saris nodded frantically. "I am going to stay right here until you cool down. Is that okay?" "Yes," she breathed. "Please." The consent grounded her. It wasn't a command, it was a partnership. For the first time in her life, someone was asking permission to be close to the weapon she carried. Jace focused on her breathing. He matched his rhythm to hers. Slow. Steady. The violet light began to stabilize. The jagged, lightning-like arc smoothed out into a soft, rhythmic glow. The warping of the metal stopped. The heat became less searing, turning into a profound, enveloping warmth. The space between them changed. It was no longer a cage. It was a cocoon. Saris looked up at him. The fear was fading, replaced by something else. Something raw and terrifyingly magnetic. They were pressed together in the dark, their hearts beating in sync. The adrenaline of the chase was morphing into a sharp, undeniable attraction. Jace felt it too. He looked at her lips, then back to her eyes. He didn't move. He kept his promise. He waited. Saris took a shaky breath. Her gaze dropped to his mouth, then returned to his. The energy in her skin pulsed, but this time, it was a warm caress against his chest, a physical manifestation of her desire. "Jace," she whispered. Her voice was steady now. "Yeah?" Jace breathed. "You can move now," she said softly. But neither of them moved away. Jace carefully released her wrists. He brought one hand up, his thumb brushing the line of her jaw, right over the glowing mark. "Are you back?" he asked quietly. "I am back," she said. For a long moment, they just existed in the silence of the shaft, the galaxy outside forgotten. The bond between them had shifted. It was no longer just survival. It was iron. Jace pulled back reluctantly, giving her space to breathe. He checked the display on his wrist, his hands shaking slightly. "The tram crash knocked out the sensors," Jace said, his voice rough. "The drones lost us. We are safe." For a minute. Saris sat up, wiping her face. She looked at Jace, at the burns on his neck where her energy had touched him. She reached out, her cool fingers touching the red skin. "I hurt you," she said, her eyes filled with regret. Jace shrugged, wincing slightly. I have had worse. Besides, he gave her a crooked, tired grin. It was worth it. You didn't explode. Saris looked at him, and the intensity in her eyes made Jace's breath catch. No, she said softly. I did not. Because you stayed. She stood up in the cramped space, bracing herself against the wall. We have the data, she said, her voice regaining its strength. We have the proof. Now we just have to survive long enough to use it. Jace stood up beside her. He looked up the shaft, and it was a long climb. After you. Princess, Jace said. Saris looked at him one last time, a silent promise passing between them in the dark. Then she reached for the ladder rung, and they began the ascent toward the light. The ventilation shaft opened not into another industrial corridor, but into a dream. Jace pushed the grate aside, his muscles screaming from the climb, and pulled himself up onto a floor of moss-covered stone. He reached down, gripping Saris's hand, and hauled her up beside him. They collapsed together on the cool, damp ground, gasping for air, their lungs burning from the exertion and the lingering terror of the shaft. When Jace finally rolled onto his back and opened his eyes, he blinked in disbelief. They were in the high gardens of the station, a hidden sanctuary designed for the meditation of the elite. Floating terraces of white marble drifted in a zero-gravity suspension field, tethered by vines of bioluminescent ivy that glowed with a soft, rhythmic pulse of teal and amber. Above them, the transparent dome of the station offered a panoramic view of the nebula the station orbited, a swirling bruise of purple and gold gas that seemed close enough to touch. It was silent here. The chaos of the drones, the screams of the alarms, and the grinding metal of the lower decks felt a million light-years away. Saris sat up, brushing dirt from her technician's tunic. The disguise was ruined, and with the holographic mesh shorted out, her royal markings were fully visible. They traced the line of her throat and spiraled down her arms, glowing with a faint, agitated light that matched the beating of her heart. We cannot stay here, Jace said, though he made no move to stand. His voice was rough, scraping against the silence. Security will sweep the upper decks eventually. Saris did not answer. She was staring at her hands, watching the violet light ebb and flow beneath her skin. She looked shaken, not by the drones, but by what had happened in the dark of the shaft. You asked, she said softly. Jace propped himself up on his elbows. What? In the shaft, Saris said, turning to look at him. Her eyes were wide, searching his face with an intensity that made Jace want to look away. When my core began to spike, when I was overloading and you did not run, you did not order me to stop, you asked for permission to hold me. Jace shrugged, looking out at the nebula. It felt like the decent thing to do, considering you were about to turn into a supernova. No, Saris insisted, her voice trembling. You do not understand. I have been handled by doctors, scientists, and generals since the day I was born. They monitor my levels. They inject me with suppressants. They tell me when to breathe, when to sleep, and who to touch. My energy is a national asset. It is a weapon. It is never mine. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering despite the warmth of the artificial garden. No one has ever cared if I wanted to be touched, she whispered. They only cared if it was safe. You were the first person to ask. Jace looked at her. He saw the cracks in the regal armor. He saw the terrified girl who had been raised in a cage made of gold and expectations. The memory of the shaft came rushing back to him, the heat of her skin, the terrifying power radiating off her, and the way she had clung to him when he promised not to let go. It terrified him. Not the danger, but the trust. I have a rule, Jace said quietly, picking at a patch of glowing moss. Never get attached to the cargo. It is bad for business. Is that what I am? Cirrus asked. Cargo? Jace looked at her. The moonlight from the nebula caught the curve of her face, illuminating the alien beauty that had started a war. No, Jace admitted, his voice low. That is the problem. You are not cargo. You are the most dangerous thing I have ever met. And I am not talking about the explosions. He sat up, crossing his legs. I walked away from the military because I was tired of watching people become numbers. Jace said, collateral damage. I told myself if I stopped caring, I stopped bleeding. I live alone. I work alone. I die alone. Simple. Efficient. He met her gaze. But when you started glowing in that hole, when I thought I was going to lose you, Jace let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. I was terrified, and it wasn't because I was worried about my paycheck. Saris moved closer to him. The distance between them on the mossy bank closed until he could feel the radiant warmth of her biofield. It wasn't burning now. It was humming, a gentle resonance that vibrated in his chest. I am afraid too, Saris confessed. She reached out, her fingers hovering inches from his hand, waiting. Jace looked at her hand. He remembered the feeling of her skin against his in the dark. He closed the gap, covering her hand with his. I am afraid that if I choose this, Saris whispered, looking at their joined hands. If I choose what I want instead of what I must do, my people will burn. I have been taught that love is a weakness, that duty is the only strength. They lied, Jace said fiercely. Duty is just a fancy word for doing what you are told. Choosing? That is the hardest thing there is. He squeezed her hand. We are going to stop Kale, Jace promised. We have the data. We are going to walk into that summit, drop the truth on their heads. And then I am going to take you somewhere where no one cares about treaties or empires. Somewhere you can glow as bright as you want and no one will try to hook you up to a battery. Saris smiled. It was a genuine smile, one that reached her eyes and made the violet lights on her skin shimmer with a soft, golden hue. I would like that, she said. For a moment, the war didn't exist. There was just the garden, the starlight, and the electric current running between their palms. Jace leaned in. Saris tilted her head up. The air around them seemed to thicken, charged with the same energy that had warped the steel in the shaft, but tamed now, focused into something magnetic. Jace's comms unit chirped a warning. Hex's voice cut through the silence. Proximity alert. Multiple signatures above and below. Before Jace could react, the serenity of the garden shattered. Reviewing targets, a mechanical voice boomed from the shadows. Figures in sleek Vanta-black armor dropped from the upper terraces, landing with heavy metallic thuds that shook the ground. They were the Obsidian Guard. They didn't move like police, they moved like predators. Jace scrambled to his feet, pulling Saris behind him. He reached for his plasma cutter, but a concussive blast hit him in the chest before his hand even touched the holster. He flew backward, slamming into a marble pillar. The world went white, then gray. He gasped, trying to inhale, but his ribs felt like shattered glass. Jace! Saris screamed. She raised her hand, her eyes flaring with violet rage. She prepared to unleash a wave of force, but a small, silver dart hissed through the air and struck her in the neck. She froze. The light in her eyes flickered and died. Her biomarkings went dark, turning to ash-gray lines on her pale skin. She swayed, her knees buckling. Neural suppressor, one of the guards stated, stepping forward to catch her as she fell. Get off her, Jace wheezed, trying to crawl forward. A heavy boot slammed into his back, pinning him to the stone. He groaned, tasting blood. Secure the asset, the guard commander ordered. Take her to the regent's chambers. Preparation for the ceremony must begin immediately. What about the human? Another guard asked, looking down at Jace with contempt. The commander glanced at Jace. Dispose of him, the commander said, but do it quietly. Put him in the lower holding cells until the summit is over. Then flush him out the airlock with the rest of the refuse. Saris was dragged away, her feet trailing through the moss. She looked back at Jace, her eyes half open, glazed with the drug, mouthing his name. Jace reached out, his fingers digging into the dirt, but the darkness was closing in. The boot on his back pressed harder, and the last thing he saw was the nebula swirling above, indifferent and cold, before the butt of a rifle cracked against his skull and the world went black. Regent Kale did not look like a monster. He looked like a statue of a beloved grandfather carved from marble. He sat in a high-backed chair of woven gold, sipping a cup of steaming aromatic tea. The room was vast, an interrogation chamber disguised as a luxury suite, with walls of crimson silk and a suppression field that hummed at a frequency that made teeth ache. Saris sat across from him. She was awake, but the suppressor drug still made her limbs feel heavy, as if she were moving underwater. She had been stripped of her tunic and dressed in the heavy, intricate ceremonial gown she was meant to wear for the wedding. The fabric was stiff with jewels, a beautiful cage. You look lovely, my dear, Kyle said, placing his tea on a floating table, just like your mother. You killed her, Saris said. Her voice was flat, devoid of the emotion that would trigger her core. She knew where she was. She knew the game. I expedited her legacy, Kale corrected smoothly. She was weak. She thought peace could be bought with smiles. I know that peace is only bought with superior firepower. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the gathering fleet. The humans are a plague. Saris, they consume, they spread. If we sign this treaty, we invite them into our homes. In 50 years, there will be no Illyrian empire, just a Terran marketplace. So you frame them, Saris said. You murder me, blame Earth, and start a genocide. It is a necessary sacrifice, Kyle said, turning to face her. And you, my dear, have a choice. He tapped a control on his wrist. A holographic screen materialized in the air between them. It showed a grainy black and white feed of a grim holding cell. Jace was there. He was slumped in the corner, blood drying on his forehead, his jumpsuit torn. He looked broken. Jace. Saris breathed, her heart hammering against her ribs. The suppression field in the room whined, reacting to her spike in emotion. The lights flickered. Control yourself, Kale warned pleasantly. The field dampens your abilities, but it does not remove them. If you overload in here, you will only hurt yourself. He pointed to the screen. Here is the deal. Saris, you will go to the summit, you will recite the vows, you will marry General Varos, and when you do, I will have this human released. He will be given a ship and enough credits to disappear. And if I refuse? Saris asked. Kale smiled. Then I will have the air vented from his cell. It takes 4 minutes to die of vacuum exposure. I am told it is quite painful. Saris stared at the screen. She looked at Jace, unconscious on the dirty floor. She felt the rage coiling in her gut, a hot nuclear snake waiting to strike. But she didn't strike. Not yet. She took a deep breath, forcing her heart rate down. She focused on the suppression field. She could feel the invisible net pressing against her skin. It was strong, but it wasn't perfect. Every field had a frequency. Every net had a hole. She let out a tiny, controlled pulse of energy, a microburst, no stronger than a static shock. The field hummed. She felt the resistance. "I understand," Sarah said, bowing her head in mock submission. "I will do as you say." "Uncle." "Excellent," Cale said, finishing his tea. "I knew you were a patriot," beneath the heavy silk of her gown. Sarah clenched her fist. She sent another pulse, slightly stronger. The field wavered for a microsecond. She was mapping it. She was finding the weak point. In the cell, Jace opened one eye. The guard monitoring the block had his back turned, watching a sports broadcast on his datapad. Jace groaned loudly, shifting his position. "Hey, ugly," Jace croaked. The guard turned, a human mercenary with a scar running through his eyebrow. "Shut up, scavenger. I need a doctor," Jace mumbled, holding his head. "I think your boys scrambled my frontal cortex. I am seeing double." "Good," the guard grunted. "That means there are two of me to kick your teeth in." Jace let his head loll back against the wall. He waited until the guard turned back to the game. Instantly, the dazed expression vanished from Jace's face. His eyes were sharp, calculating. He wasn't broken, he was angry. And an angry engineer was a dangerous thing. He reached behind him. The cell was old. The wall plating was loose near the floor. He had spotted it the moment they threw him in. He worked his fingers into the gap, prying the metal back with agonizing slowness. Beneath the plate was the conduit bundle for the cell's waste disposal unit. Jace pulled a thin wire from the lining of his boot, a lockpick he never traveled without. "Okay, Hex," Jace whispered, tapping the implant behind his ear. "Please tell me you are still online." The familiar voice of the AI was faint, static-filled, but there. "I am operating on emergency backup power." "Jace, my transmitter is damaged. I cannot access the station's main grid." "I don't need the main grid," Jace whispered, stripping the insulation off a power cable with his teeth. "I just need you to cycle the voltage on this waste disposal unit. That will simply flush the toilet." "Jace," Hex pointed out. "Not if I bridge the ground wire to the magnetic lock solenoid," Jace said, twisting the wires together. "Then, it becomes a localized EMP. It will also likely electrocute you," Hex added. "Details," Jace muttered. "Listen, I need timing. The princess, can you track her biosign?" "Faintly," Hex said. "She is in the royal wing. Her stress levels are rising." "Jace, her pattern is oscillating. She is signaling." "Signaling?" "Short, rhythmic bursts. It is Morse code." "Jace, she is tapping out a countdown." Jace grinned, blood cracking on his lip. "That is my girl. What is the count?" 90 seconds, Hex said. Jace looked at the wires. He looked at the guard. He looked at the heavy blast door. 90 seconds to rig a bomb out of a toilet, Jace said. "Let us get to work." The corridor leading to the grand hall was a canyon of gold and glass. Saris walked with her head high, flanked by 6 obsidian guards. General Varos walked beside her, his hand gripping her elbow tight enough to bruise. "You are trembling, princess," Varos sneered. "Try to look happy. It is your wedding day." Saris didn't look at him. She was listening to the rhythm of her own blood. She was counting. 60 seconds. She felt the vibrations in the floor, below them. The prisoner transfer tram was moving. She knew the layout of the station. The holding cells were directly beneath this wing. 30 seconds. She let the energy build. She didn't fight it this time. She gathered every ounce of fear, every drop of anger, every shadow of the trauma they had inflicted on her, and she pulled it into her core. The suppression field collar around her neck grew hot. 10 seconds. Varos frowned. "Why are you glowing?" 5. Sarah stopped walking. She looked at Varos. Because, she said, her voice cold as the void, I am not a bride. I am a battery. 0. She screamed. It wasn't a scream of despair. It was a war cry. She unleashed the energy she had been holding, not outward, but downward. She drove a spike of pure, concentrated kinetic force through the floor, aiming for the power junction she knew ran beneath the corridor. At the exact same moment, 3 levels down, Jace jammed 2 live wires together. The resulting feedback loop was catastrophic. Jace's EMP collided with Ceres's overload in the station's power grid. The lights in the entire wing exploded. The gravity generators failed. The blast doors shrieked and slammed open. Chaos erupted. In the corridor, the sudden loss of gravity sent the guards tumbling. Ceres, accustomed to the shift, kicked off the wall, grabbing a stunned guard's shock pike as she spun. She slammed the blunt end into Varos's face, sending the general spinning away into the dark. Below, Jace kicked the door of his cell open. Sparks showered around him. Free prisoners were pouring into the hallway, fighting the confused guards. It was a riot. Jace didn't stop to fight. He ran. He scrambled up the maintenance ladder, taking the rungs 3 at a time, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm. Ceres, he yelled into the comms. Level 12, Hex shouted. The corridor is secure, but reinforcements are coming. Jace burst through the service hatch onto the ceremonial level. The hallway was a disaster zone. Flickering emergency lights strobed red. Smoke filled the air. At the far end, surrounded by unconscious guards, stood Ceres. She was glowing so bright it hurt to look at her. Her ceremonial gown was ripped at the shoulder. She held the shock pike like a spear of vengeance. She saw him. The light in her skin flared. She dropped the pike. Jace! She didn't run, she launched herself. In the low gravity, she flew across the corridor. Jace caught her, the impact slamming him back against the wall. He didn't care about the pain. He buried his face in her neck, breathing in the scent of ozone and silk. She clung to him, her hands tangling in his hair, her body shaking violently. I thought they killed you, she sobbed, the regal facade shattering completely. I told you, Jace gasped, holding her tight enough to bruise. I am tough to kill. She pulled back, framing his face with her glowing hands. She looked at his split lip, the blood on his forehead. Her eyes were wild, fierce. We have to go, she said. The shuttle bay is ahead. Jace looked at her. He didn't say anything. He just leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was desperate. It tasted of blood and smoke and the terrifying relief of survival. It was a seal on the promise they had made in the garden. It was a declaration of war against anyone who tried to separate them again. Ceres made a sound in her throat, pressing closer, her energy flaring against his chest, not burning him, but warming him, fusing them together. When they broke apart, breathless, Jace grinned. Now we can go. The diplomatic shuttle was a sleek, silver dart compared to the Rustwing. Jace hotwired the ignition sequence while Ceres fused the door shut behind them. They blasted out of the hangar bay just as the blast doors began to close, scraping the paint off the starboard wing. Jace punched the coordinates for the dark side of the station's orbit, a blind spot in the sensors where they could hide and regroup before the summit began. When the engines settled into a steady hum and the autopilot engaged, the adrenaline finally crashed. The cabin was quiet. The only light came from the instrument panel and the soft, rhythmic glow of Ceres's skin. She stood in the center of the cabin, trembling. The overload she had triggered in the hallway was fading, but the aftershocks were racking her body. Jace unbuckled and went to her. You are shaking, he said softly. It is the residue, she whispered. My nerves are fraying. She looked at him. She looked terrifyingly fragile, despite the power she wielded. Jace reached out, but he stopped inches from her arms. He remembered the garden. "Can I touch you?" he asked. "Yes." She breathed. "Please." He wrapped his arms around her. She collapsed against him, her head resting on his shoulder. He walked them backward until they hit the cushioned bench along the wall, and he sat down, pulling her into his lap. It wasn't sexual. It was foundational. It was two people trying to anchor each other in a storm. Saris let out a long, shuddering sigh. She traced the line of Jace's jaw with her finger. "They are going to hunt us," she whispered. "Let them come," Jace said, resting his forehead against hers. Saris closed her eyes. She focused on the feeling of his heartbeat against her chest. She focused on his hands, one on her waist, one on the back of her neck, steady and safe. For the first time in her life, she felt her core settle. The violet light on her skin dimmed until it was just a soft, twilight glimmer. "Jace," she whispered. "Yeah? I do not want to be a weapon anymore." "You are not," Jace said. "You are Saris, just Saris." She looked up at him. The fear was gone. In its place was a clarity that was sharper than any diamond. She leaned in and kissed him again. This time, it was slow. It was tender. It was a conversation without words. She felt her energy rise, the familiar prickle of the overload, but she didn't push it down. She held it. She shaped it. She let it flow into the kiss, a warm, golden current that tasted of starlight. Jace gasped softly against her lips, feeling the energy move through him. It didn't hurt. It felt like being alive. "I am not afraid of the fire," Jace whispered against her mouth. "I know." Saris answered. She pulled back slightly, looking at him with a fierce, possessive love. "We have one chance," she said. "The summit starts in 2 hours." Jace nodded. He brushed a stray lock of hair from her face. "Then we better make it count." They sat there for a long time, holding on to the quiet, holding on to each other, while the galaxy outside prepared for war. In the silence of the stolen ship, they chose their future. They chose the danger. They chose the impossible. But mostly, they chose each other. The stolen diplomatic shuttle, now identifying as the courier vessel Silver Dart, cut through the silence of the outer system like a needle through black velvet. Jace Arden sat at the helm, his hands tight on the controls, while Saris Illyria paced the small cabin behind him. Her movements were agitated, the bioluminescent markings on her skin flickering with a restless, staccato rhythm that mirrored the tension in the cockpit. Ahead of them, the target loomed against the backdrop of the stars. The Peace Citadel was not a station. It was a mobile fortress, a cathedral of white alloy and transparency steel that served as the neutral ground for the summit. It was surrounded by a mixed fleet. Terran destroyers with their blocky utilitarian hulls floated uneasily alongside the sweeping, elegant curves of Illyrian cruisers. It was a powder keg waiting for a spark. "We are entering the exclusion zone," Jace said, his voice level but tight. "Hex, run the codes. If this shuttle is flagged as stolen, we are going to be vaporized by both sides simultaneously. Transmitting clearance codes now." Hex replied from the console speakers. "Codes accepted. Welcome to the party. Jace, try not to crash into the dignitaries." Jace exhaled, the tension in his shoulders dropping an inch. "We are in. Now we just need to figure out where Kale is hiding the—" "Wait," Saris interrupted, freezing in mid-step. Her eyes lost focus, turning inward. "The intercepted stream. It is decoding." She moved to the communications station, where the encrypted data packet they had snatched from the capital was still processing. A holographic waveform hovered in the air, jagged and angry. "Hex! Audio!" Saris commanded. The cabin filled with a voice that made the blood in Jace's veins turn to ice. It was Regent Kale, speaking with the clinical detachment of a butcher. "The asset has proven unstable." Kale's voice purred. "But that is an advantage. The human delegation expects a wedding. They will receive a supernova. The crown of starlight has been modified. The moment the bonding vows are spoken, the array will trigger a resonant frequency in the princess's core." A second voice, human and rough, answered, the Ares Dynamics liaison. "And the yield? Total," Kale replied. "The thermal expansion alone will vaporize the citadel. The electromagnetic pulse will blind the fleet. By the time the sensors clear, the phantom destroyers will have opened fire on Earth. We will claim the princess was assassinated by a human suicide bomber. A tragedy that demands a war of extermination." The transmission ended with a soft click. Silence stretched in the shuttle cabin, heavy and suffocating. Saris stood paralyzed. Her hand rose slowly to her chest, hovering over the heart that Kale intended to turn into a warhead. "I am the bomb," she whispered. The horror in her voice was absolute. "It is not a weapon they are bringing to the summit. It is me. They are going to use my own body to murder millions." She turned to Jace, her eyes wide and brimming with a terrifying mixture of guilt and despair. "We cannot go there. Jace, if I step onto that platform, if I overload, everyone dies. The humans, my people, you." She backed away from him, hitting the bulkhead. "Turn the ship around," she pleaded. "Take me to deep space. Drop me in a black hole, anywhere but there." Jace unbuckled his harness. He crossed the small cabin in 2 strides. He didn't touch her. He knew she was on the edge of a spike, but he stood close enough to block her retreat, planting his hands on the wall on either side of her head. "No," Jace said firmly. "Jace, listen to me," Saris cried, her markings flaring bright white. "I am a catastrophe waiting to happen. Kale has turned me into a gun pointed at Earth." "No," Jace repeated, his voice cutting through her panic. "He has turned you into an amplifier." He leaned in, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Think like an engineer, Saris, not a victim. What does the core do? It converts emotion into energy. Kinetic, thermal, electrical. It destroys." Saris choked out. "It broadcasts," Jace corrected. "It pushes energy out. Kale wants to shape that energy into heat. He wants an explosion. But energy is just data if you modulate it right." He pulled back, pacing the cabin, his mind racing at 1,000 miles an hour. "The crown of starlight," Jace said, gesturing wildly. "It is a focusing array, right? Crystals? Conductors?" "Yes," Saris said, confused by his shift in tone. "It connects to the neural interface of the wearer. It is meant to amplify the telepathic bonding vows." Jace spun around, a grin breaking through the grim set of his jaw. It was a reckless, dangerous grin, the kind he wore when he was stripping a hyperdrive with a screwdriver. "So we changed the frequency," Jace said. "We hacked the crown." "Hacked the crown?" Saris repeated, staring at him as if he had grown a second head. "We reprogrammed the array," Jace explained, stepping closer again. "We take that spike, that massive overload Kale is counting on, and instead of letting it turn into a fireball, we channel it into the communications grid. We turn you into the biggest antenna in the galaxy." He took her hands. Her skin was hot, vibrating with suppressed power, but he held on tight. "We don't explode the citadel, Saris. We broadcast the truth. We take all that data we stole, the plans, the recordings, Kale's confession, and we ride your energy surge to blast it into every datapad, every ship, and every view screen in the system. Saris looked at him. She looked at the confidence in his eyes, the absolute refusal to accept the role of a victim. The fear in her chest began to recede, replaced by a spark of defiant hope. "Can we do that?" she asked softly. "Is it possible? With my hands and your brain?" Jace squeezed her fingers. "Anything is possible. But we have to get close. We have to get you into that ceremony. And I need to get my hands on that crown before you put it on." Saris took a deep breath. The violet light on her arm stabilized, pulsing with a steady, determined rhythm. "Then let us go," she said, her voice hardening into steel. "I have a wedding to crash." The docking bay of the Citadel was a hive of activity. Security was tight, but chaos was the best camouflage. The arrival of the Silver Dart was barely noted amidst the swarm of shuttles delivering dignitaries, caterers, and media teams. Jace and Saris moved quickly, slipping into the service corridors that ran like arteries behind the pristine white walls of the station. "Here is where we split up," Jace whispered, pulling up a schematic on his wrist computer. He pointed to a ventilation grate near the floor. "I have to access the crown chamber from the maintenance crawlspace. The security grid on the main door is DNA locked to the Royal Guard." "And I?" Saris asked, adjusting the collar of the high-necked, nondescript technician's uniform she had scavenged from the shuttle. "You are the distraction," Jace said. "You need to keep the guards busy at the front entrance so they don't look at the vents." Saris nodded. She reached up, touching his cheek for a fleeting second. "Do not get caught. Jace Arden. Do not start the party without me. Princess." Jace vanished into the grate, sliding into the dark, cramped claustrophobia of the station's guts. Saris straightened her spine, composed her features into a mask of imperious boredom, and marched toward the preparation wing. She turned the corner to the crown chamber and found 2 hulking Illyrian guards blocking the door. "Halt!" the guard rumbled. "This area is restricted to the royal entourage." Saris didn't stop. She didn't even slow down. She pulled herself up to her full height, channeling every ounce of the haughty, spoiled aristocrat she had pretended to be on the trade station. "Restricted?" she scoffed, her voice dripping with disdain. "I am Lady Alara's personal stylist. Do you have any idea how long it takes to calibrate the luminescence on a ceremonial gown? If I am not in that room in 30 seconds, the princess will walk out onto that stage looking like a dim light bulb. And I will tell the regent personally that it was your fault." The guard blinked. He had been briefed on assassins, not angry stylists. "I have no authorization for a stylist," the guard grumbled, checking his data pad. "That is because the authorization is in the laundry queue with the rest of the incompetents on this station," Saris shouted, stepping into his personal space. "Move aside, you oversized tin can, or I will have you reassigned to waste disposal on a mining colony." Jace's voice crackled in her hidden earpiece, breathless and tinny. "Tin can? You are reusing material. Princess, try to be original. Shut up and crawl." "Jace," Saris thought, keeping her glare fixed on the guard. The guard sighed, the universal sound of a man who decided he wasn't paid enough to argue with nobles. He stepped aside and keyed the door open. 5 minutes, he warned. Saris swept past him, nose in the air, as the door hissed shut behind her. She let out a breath, her knees shaking. The crown chamber was empty, silent, and cold. In the center of the room, resting on a pedestal of floating grav discs, was the crown of starlight. It was a nightmare of beauty, a circlet of white gold spikes holding a lattice of dark, pulsing crystals. Saris approached it. She could feel the device humming. It felt hungry. "Jace," she whispered. A vent cover in the ceiling popped open with a quiet clank. Jace dropped down, landing in a crouch. He was covered in dust, grimacing as he rubbed his shoulder. "Your architecture is terrible," he grumbled, standing up. "Who puts a structural support beam through a crawl space?" He hurried to the pedestal. He didn't waste time admiring the view. He pulled a toolkit from his belt and snapped on a pair of magnifying goggles. "Okay," Jace muttered, leaning over the crown. "Let us see what Kale did to you." He produced a micro laser and began to carefully slice into the casing of the central crystal. Sarah stood on the other side of the pedestal, watching him. Her heart was racing. Every second that ticked by was a second closer to discovery. "Jace," she whispered. "I see it," Jace said, his voice tight. He pointed with a delicate probe. "There, a microfilament running from the neural receiver to the power cell. It is a feedback loop. As soon as you bond, it dumps the charge back into the core instead of releasing it. It creates a critical mass event." "Can you reverse it?" Saris asked. "I have to cut the filament and bridge it to the external transmitter array," Jace said, sweat beading on his forehead. "But the circuitry is microscopic, and it is live. If I touch the wrong wire, it might trigger the overload right now." He looked up at her. "I need you to hold the stabilizer," Jace said, handing her a small magnetic clamp. "Keep it steady on this crystal. Do not move, not even a millimeter." Saris took the clamp. Her hands were trembling. I do not know if I can," she said. "The energy. It is rising. Jace. Just being near the crown makes my skin burn." Jace paused. He reached out, covering her hands with his own for a second. "Look at me," he commanded softly. "You are not a bomb. You are the pilot. You control the flight. Just hold it steady. For me." Saris nodded. She focused on his eyes. She anchored herself to his calm. She held the clamp against the pulsing crystal. Jace went to work. The laser hissed. Sparks, tiny as grains of sand, danced in the air between them. They were inches apart. Saris could feel the warmth of his breath on her cheek. The intimacy was suffocating and electric. This wasn't just surgery on a machine, it was surgery on their fate. Almost. "There." Jace breathed. The door behind them hissed open. "Well, isn't this touching?" Jace spun around, putting himself between Saris and the door. General Varos stood in the entryway. He wasn't alone. 4 elite guards filled the room, weapons raised. Varos held a heavy plasma pistol, a cruel smile twisting his scarred lips. "I told the Regent you would try something," Varos said, stepping into the room. "A scavenger and a traitor. How poetic." Saris dropped the clamp. The crown hummed, destabilized. "Run." "Jace," she whispered. Jace didn't run. He grabbed the nearest object, a heavy ceremonial vase, and hurled it at Varos. "Go!" Jace roared, charging the guards with nothing but a screwdriver. The room exploded into violence. Jace was fast, but he wasn't a soldier. He ducked under a rifle butt, jamming his screwdriver into the armor joint of one guard. But a second guard slammed a shield into his chest. Jace flew backward, crashing into the pedestal. The crown of starlight skittered across the floor. Varos fired. The plasma bolt caught Jace in the thigh. Jace screamed, collapsing to the ground, clutching his leg. Smoke rose from the wound. "No!" Saris shrieked. She didn't think. She didn't calculate. She let the fear explode. She thrust her hands forward. A wave of violet force erupted from her body. It wasn't the precise, targeted strike she had used in the shaft. It was a raw, expanding sphere of gravity. The guards were lifted off their feet and slammed into the walls. Varos was thrown back through the doorway, his pistol clattering away. The windows of the chamber shattered, venting atmosphere for a second before the emergency field snapped into place. Saris fell to her knees, gasping, her vision swimming. The exertion had nearly blacked her out. She crawled toward Jace. He was pale, his teeth gritted against the pane, blood pooling on the white floor. "Jace!" She ripped a strip of fabric from her tunic, pressing it to his leg. "I am okay," Jace wheezed, his eyes unfocused. "Just scorched." He looked at the crown. It was lying on its side near the wall. One of the crystal spires was cracked. The array. Jace groaned. "It is damaged." Saris scrambled to retrieve it. She brought it back to him. The central crystal was fractured. The delicate bridge Jace had been building was severed. "It is broken," Saris said, tears welling in her eyes. "We cannot broadcast. The signal won't hold." Jace forced himself to sit up, fighting through the agony in his leg. He grabbed the crown, examining the fracture with shaking hands. "The regulator is gone," he muttered. "If you try to channel the overload through this now, it will burn out your brain. It needs a secondary neural sync to stabilize the flow." He looked around the room, desperate. His eyes landed on the interface chip on his own wrist computer. "Me," Jace said. "What?" "I can be the regulator," Jace said, his voice gaining strength. "The crown has a port for a second interface. If I link my neural pattern to yours, I can take the excess strain. I can guide the signal. But the feedback—" Saris whispered, realizing what he was suggesting. "If the surge is too strong, it will kill you. It will fry your mind along with the chip." "It is the only way," Jace said. He ripped the interface chip from his bracer and jammed it into the auxiliary port on the crown. He grabbed Saris's shoulders. "Listen to me. When you walk out there, I will be right below you in the access node. I will be plugged in. When you start the overload, you won't be doing it alone. I will be in your head. Saris, we do this together." Saris looked at the blood on his leg, the sweat on his face, and the fierce, undeniable love in his eyes. "You will die," she sobbed. "Not today," Jace said. He pulled her down and kissed her, hard, desperate, and filled with a reckless promise. "I am not letting you go." Boots thudded in the hallway. More guards were coming. "Go!" Jace shoved the crown into her hands. "Put it on. Act like nothing happened. I will get to the node." Saris stood up. She placed the damaged crown of starlight on her head. It felt heavy, cold, and terrifying. She looked down at Jace one last time as he dragged himself toward the open vent grate, leaving a smear of red on the pristine floor. "I love you," she whispered. "Tell me that when we survive." Jace gritted out and vanished into the darkness below. The grand hall of the Peace Citadel was a cavern of light. Thousands of delegates sat in floating tiers, humans in severe suits, Illyrians in shimmering robes. At the center of the amphitheater was a raised platform of transparent glass, suspended over a drop that went down to the reactor core. Saris walked onto the platform. The silence was absolute. She wore the ceremonial robes that Kale had prepared, but on her head, she wore the broken crown. She kept her chin high, her face a mask of regal calm, though her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Regent Kale stood on the platform, smiling like a benevolent patriarch. General Varos, bruised and limping but present, stood by his side, glaring at her with murderous hate. "You made it," Kyle murmured as she took her place. "I was worried you would be late. I would not miss the fireworks." "Uncle," Saris replied, her voice ice, beneath the floor, in a cramped, dark crawl space filled with conduit cables. Jace Arden dragged his wounded leg into position. He was directly under the glass platform. He could see the soles of Ceres's shoes. He tapped the interface chip on the crown's remote link. He jammed a connector cable into the port behind his ear. Syncing. Hex's voice whispered in his mind. Warning. Neural load will exceed safety limits by 300%. Override safety, Jace thought. Connect me. A jolt of white-hot pain shot through his skull. He bit down on a piece of rubber tubing to keep from screaming. Suddenly, the pain vanished, replaced by a sensation of pure light. He could feel her. He could feel Ceres's fear, her heartbeat, the cold weight of the crown on her head. I am here. Jace projected his thought. On the platform above, Ceres's eyes widened slightly. She felt him, a warm, steady presence at the back of her mind, anchoring her. Jace, she thought back. Stand tall, princess, Jace's voice echoed in her head. Let us make some noise. The high priest stepped forward, raising a staff of office. We are gathered here to bind 2 souls and 2 nations, the priest intoned. Ceres looked at the crowd. She saw the human ambassador. She saw the Illyrian admirals. They were all waiting for peace. They were all waiting to die. Kyle nodded to the priest. The ceremony began. Do you, Princess Ceres Illyria, pledge your life and your essence to the preservation of the Empire? The priest asked. Ceres took a deep breath. She felt the crown waking up. The damaged crystals began to hum, digging into her scalp. Kale's trigger signal was incoming. She could feel the remote activation command building in the airwaves. Now, Jace thought, let it in. Ceres closed her eyes. She dropped her mental shields. She didn't wait for Kyle to pull the trigger. She pulled it herself. She reached into her core and unleashed everything. The terror of the derelict ship, the anger at the interrogation, the love in the garden. She pushed it all into the bio-neural feedback loop. Hold it, Jace screamed in her mind. Below the floor, Jace's body convulsed. The energy hit him like a physical train. Blood poured from his nose. His vision went white, but he held on. He acted as the dam, catching the flood of energy that would have vaporized Ceres, filtering it, shaping it, redirecting to comms array, Jace thought, his mind feeling like it was being torn in half. Frequency modulation, set on the platform. Ceres opened her eyes. They weren't violet anymore, they were blinding white stars. I pledge, Ceres's voice rang out, amplified by the raw power surging through her. Nothing to this lie. Kale's smile faltered. He tapped his wrist controller frantically. Detonate, he hissed to Varos. Why isn't she detonating? Because I am not a bomb, Ceres screamed. The crown of starlight flared. A shockwave of pure energy blasted outward from Ceres. It didn't shatter the glass. It didn't melt the walls. It hit the antenna grid. The lights in the grand hall flickered and died, replaced instantly by a storm of holograms. The air above the delegates filled with giant shimmering projections, intercepted logs, audio recordings, the schematic of the Phantom Fleet, Kale's face, 20 feet high, sneering. The humans are a plague. We will claim the princess was assassinated. The entire conspiracy, vomited out in a single undeniable burst of light and sound. Panic erupted in the hall. Kyle stared at the projection of his own treason, his face draining of color. Kill her, Kale shrieked, pointing at Ceres. Kill the witch. Varos drew a hidden knife and lunged at Ceres. Jace, Ceres screamed in her mind. I got you. Jace, bleeding and half-conscious in the dark, rerouted the last dregs of the surge. He pushed it back into Ceres's muscles. Ceres moved faster than thought. She sidestepped Varos's thrust, grabbed his wrist, and discharged the remaining energy directly into his chest armor. The general flew backward as if hit by a freight train. sliding across the glass platform to land unconscious at Kale's feet. Saris stood alone in the center of the storm, the broken crown sparking on her head, her chest heaving. The connection severed. Jace? Saris thought, reaching out with her mind. Silence. Beneath the floor. Jace Arden lay still, the interface cable sparking against his neck, his eyes closed to the dark. The grand hall of the Peace Citadel was an architectural impossibility, a bowl of spun glass and suspended light floating in the void. It was designed to make the beings inside feel small, to remind them that empires were fleeting dust against the backdrop of the eternal cosmos. Thousands of delegates filled the tiered seating rings. On the left, the Terran Coalition representatives sat in stiff, dark suits, their faces tight with the suspicion of prey waiting for a trap. On the right, the Illyrian nobility shimmered in iridescent silks, their posture rigid with centuries of practiced superiority. At the center of it all, hovering over the reactor shaft that powered the station, was the ceremonial dais. Saris stood there. The crown of starlight felt like a vice around her temples, heavy and cold. The broken crystal Jace had jury-rigged hummed against her scalp, a terrifying reminder of how close they were to the edge. Beside her stood General Varos, looking battered from their earlier encounter but standing with the grim determination of a man who knew the plan. And Regent Kale. He stood a step ahead of them, his arms spread wide as if to embrace the galaxy. He smiled like a benevolent uncle, a man of peace, while his eyes remained as cold and dead as the vacuum outside. We stand here today, Kale's voice boomed, amplified by the station's acoustics, not as two species but as one future. Saris stared straight ahead. She could see the cameras. She knew that billions of people on Earth and Elira Prime were watching. She could feel the sweat trickling down her spine beneath the heavy ceremonial robes. Kyle turned to her, his smile tightening just a fraction. And to seal this future, my niece, Princess Saris, will offer her essence. The binding vows will unite her spirit with the Empire's greatest defender. The High Priest stepped forward, raising a staff that glowed with a dull, rhythmic light. The silence in the hall was absolute. It was the silence of a held breath. Kyle's hand drifted to his wrist. He didn't look at the controller. He just tapped it. It began. It wasn't a sound. It was a sensation. A spike of pure white-hot agony drove itself into the base of Saris's skull. The crown of starlight woke up, but not as a passive receiver. The modified feedback loop Kale had installed kicked in, seizing the natural energy of her bio-neural core and twisting it. Saris gasped, her vision fracturing into kaleidoscope shards of violet and red. It felt like her blood was boiling. The energy inside her, the fear, the adrenaline, the desperate hope, was being sucked out, amplified 1,000 times and forced back down into her nervous system. She was going to detonate. She was going to become a star in the middle of the room, beneath the floor, in the cramped, cable-choked darkness of the access node. Jace Arden screamed. He had jammed the interface cable into the port behind his ear just seconds before. The surge hit him like a physical blow, arching his back off the metal grating. His vision went white. The pain was blinding, a screeching feedback loop that threatened to liquefy his brain. Warning. Hex's voice buzzed in his mind, sounding distant and terrified. Neural load at critical. Synaptic failure imminent. Jace, disconnect. No, Jace thought, clenching his teeth so hard he felt a molar crack. He slammed his hand onto the manual override of his wrist computer. He didn't block the surge. He opened the door to it. He reached out through the wire, through the digital dark, searching for the only thing that mattered. Saris. On the platform. Saris fell to her knees. The delegates gasped. General Varos took a step back, shielding his eyes as the violet light began to pour from her skin, bright enough to cast shadows on the ceiling. She was drowning in the fire. The overload was a tidal wave, and she was just a piece of driftwood. "I have you." The voice was in her head. It wasn't a sound, it was a feeling. It was the smell of engine grease and stale coffee. It was the roughness of calloused hands. It was Jace. Suddenly, she wasn't alone in the fire. The neural link snapped into place, bridging their minds. The barrier between them dissolved. For a singular, frozen second, time stopped. Jace saw her life. He didn't just see it, he lived it. He felt the crushing cold of the nursery where she was raised, a room of white tiles where she was monitored by machines instead of held by a mother. He felt the loneliness of 1,000 ceremonial dinners where she sat like a doll, unable to speak, unable to move, terrifyingly aware that she was a weapon in a silk dress. He felt the weight of the empire pressing down on her small shoulders, demanding she be perfect, demanding she be hollow. And Saris felt him. She felt the grit of the salvage yards. She felt the deep, aching scar of the school he had bombed, the guilt that he carried like a stone in his gut every day. She felt his cynicism, his belief that the universe was a broken machine that couldn't be fixed. But beneath that, she felt a stubborn, burning ember of hope that he tried to hide, a hope that maybe, just maybe, something was worth saving. She felt his love for her. It was terrifyingly vast, a desperate, protective roar that drowned out the pain of the overload. "Do not fight it." Jace's thought brushed against hers. "You are trying to hold it in. You are trying to be a dam. Do not be a dam, Saris. Be a river. It is too much," she cried out in the silence of their shared mind. "It will kill everyone." "No," Jace answered. "Not if we aim it." He was the engineer. She was the power source. In the physical world, the light surrounding Saris shifted. The jagged, chaotic lightning that threatened to tear the station apart smoothed out. It began to pulse with a rhythm. Jace, lying in the dark with blood running from his nose, began to type on a virtual keyboard in his mind. He was rewriting the Crown's output protocols in real time, using his own neural pathways as the processor. "Redirect thermal output to data stream," Jace commanded. "Convert kinetic potential to transmission gain." Saris took a breath. She stood up. The agony didn't stop, but it changed. It became fuel. She stopped resisting the overload. She leaned into it. She grabbed the terrifying power Kale had forced upon her, and she owned it. She opened her eyes. They were blinding white stars. Regent Kale took a step back, his smile faltering. "What are you doing?" he hissed. "Explode!" Saris looked at him. "No!" She threw her arms wide. The surge didn't go down into the reactor. It didn't go out as fire. It went up. A beam of pure, concentrated data erupted from the crown of starlight. It punched through the glass ceiling of the Citadel, passing through the hull, and hit the orbital relay satellites thousands of miles away. The transmission gain was impossible. It wasn't just a broadcast. It was a shout that saturated every frequency in the solar system. In the grand hall, the lights died. Then, the air blossomed. Holograms, thousands of them. They materialized in the center of the amphitheater, 3 stories high, glowing in sharp, undeniable blue. It was the stolen data, a recording played, thunderously loud. It was Kale's voice. "The human delegation expects a wedding. They will receive a supernova." The image shifted. It showed a tactical map, the Phantom Fleet, marked with Imperial transponders, hiding in the shadow of the moon, weapons locked on Earth's major cities. It showed the bank transfers, the billions of credits flowing from the Ares Dynamics Corporation into Kale's private accounts. The hall erupted. The human delegates jumped to their feet, shouting. The Illyrian nobles stared in horror at the undeniable proof of their regent's treason. Kale stood frozen on the platform, bathed in the light of his own confession. He looked small. He looked caught. "Cut the feed!" Kale screamed, his voice cracking. "Jam the signal!" He turned to the control booth, but the technicians were staring at their screens, paralyzed by the truth. Kale's face twisted into a mask of pure animal panic. He looked at the humans. He looked at the chaos. "Kill them!" Kale shrieked, pointing at the Terran delegation. "They are faking it! It is a human trick! Fire!" He looked at his obsidian guards. "Fire, you cowards!" The guards raised their rifles, but they didn't fire. They looked at the holograms. They looked at the map showing the fleet poised to murder billions. They looked at their princess, who was standing like an avenging angel in the center of the storm. They lowered their weapons. "Treason," one of the guard captains whispered. Kyle backed away, his eyes darting around. He saw Varos. "General," Kyle shouted, "do something!" Varos didn't look at the holograms. He was a soldier who followed orders, even when the orders were madness. He pulled a serrated combat knife from his belt. He didn't go for the humans. He went for the source. He lunged at Ceres. Ceres was still reeling from the broadcast, her energy spent, her knees weak. She saw the flash of steel, but she was too slow to move. But she wasn't alone. The floor panel directly in front of her exploded. Jace Arden erupted from the maintenance shaft like a cannonball. He was covered in dust, bleeding from the nose and ears, dragging his wounded leg. But he moved with the desperation of a man who had nothing left to lose. He didn't have a weapon. He used his body. He slammed into Varos midair, tackling the general away from Ceres. They crashed onto the glass floor, sliding toward the edge of the drop. The knife skittered away. "Jace!" Ceres screamed. Varos was bigger, stronger, and trained to kill. He roared, throwing Jace off him. He delivered a brutal backhand that snapped Jace's head back, sending a spray of blood across the transparent floor. Jace scrambled backward, gasping for air. Varos was on him instantly, grabbing him by the throat and lifting him up. "You filth!" Varos snarled, tightening his grip. "You ruined everything." Jace clawed at the general's arm, his vision graying out. He couldn't breathe. His lungs burned. Ceres watched, horror freezing her veins. She tried to summon a blast, a wave, anything to knock Varos away. But she was empty. The broadcast had drained her core. "Think, Ceres." Jace's voice echoed faintly in her mind, a ghost of their connection. Not power, precision. She focused. She didn't need a tidal wave. She needed a scalpel. She looked at the floor beneath Varos's feet. The glass panel was cracked from their impact. She reached out with the last dregs of her energy. She didn't push. She resonated. She found the frequency of the glass. She flicked her wrist. The glass panel beneath the general's right boot shattered. Varos stumbled, his leg plunging into the hole. His grip on Jace loosened. That was all Jace needed. He didn't try to punch the general. He reached into his belt and pulled out his favorite tool, the plasma cutter. He thumbed the ignition. He didn't aim for the general's face. He aimed for the hydraulic actuator on the general's power armor knee joint. The laser hissed. The hydraulic line exploded, venting pressurized fluid. The armor locked up instantly. Varos roared as his own suit became a statue, trapping his leg in the floor. Jace dropped to the ground, swept his good leg out, and kicked the general's other knee. Varos toppled backward, unable to balance, and crashed heavily to the floor, pinned by his own weight and the broken floor. Jace lay there for a second, panting, staring up at the holograms still swirling above them. He rolled over and looked at Ceres. "Did we win?" He wheezed. Ceres didn't answer. She ran to him, falling to her knees and pulling him into her arms. She buried her face in his neck, sobbing with relief. Security teams were swarming the platform now, but they weren't attacking. They were moving past Saris and Jace, their weapons trained on Kale. Regent Kale was backed against the railing. He looked at the guards. He looked at the ruins of his plan. "I did it for the Empire," Kale screamed. "You did it for yourself," the guard captain said, grabbing Kale by the collar and forcing him to his knees. "Lord Regent, you are under arrest for high treason against the throne and the people." The hall erupted in applause. It started slow, then built into a roar, humans and Illyrians standing together, cheering not for a treaty, but for the truth. Saris helped Jace stand up. He leaned heavily on her, his leg ruining the line of his jumpsuit, but he was grinning. They stood together on the platform, the princess in her torn robes and the scavenger in his grease-stained suit. A drone camera hovered near them, broadcasting their image to the system. One of the Illyrian admirals stepped forward, looking shaken. "Princess," he said, bowing low, "the regent is incapacitated. By law, the regency dissolves. You are the empress now. We await your command." Saris looked at the admiral. She looked at the throne that Kale had vacated. She looked at the crown of starlight, lying cracked and useless on the floor. Then she looked at Jace. She took a deep breath. She turned to the camera. "No," Saris said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the room. The applause died down. Confusion rippled through the crowd. "I will not be empress," Saris declared. "The empire was built on the idea that power justifies control, that some are born to rule and others to serve, that a person can be a weapon." She reached up and touched the spot on her neck where the suppressor collar used to sit. "I am done being a symbol. I am done being a tool." She took Jace's hand, lacing her fingers through his. "There will be a council," Saris said. "Humans and Illyrians, equals. You will write a new treaty, one that is not signed with blood or forced marriages." "But," the admiral stammered, "who will lead us?" "You will lead yourselves," Saris said. "It is time you learned how to choose, just as I have chosen." She turned and walked off the platform, pulling Jace with her, leaving the crown, the throne, and the stunned silence of the galaxy behind them. 3 days later, the observation deck of the Peace Citadel was empty. The repairs were still ongoing and most of the station was closed, but the balcony overlooking the great nebula was untouched. Jace leaned against the railing, staring out at the swirling clouds of purple and gold starlight. He was clean, for once. He wore a new tunic, simple and dark, though he still looked uncomfortable without his tool belt. He was leaning on a cane, favoring his healing leg. Footsteps echoed on the metal deck, soft, purposeful. He didn't turn around. He knew the rhythm of those steps. "You are supposed to be in a meeting," Jace said. Saris joined him at the railing. She wore simple clothes, trousers and a loose shirt. No robes, no jewels. Her markings were visible, glowing with a soft, contented peach light. "I walked out," she said, leaning her elbows on the rail. "The Provisional Council argues about tariffs for 4 hours. I decided I would rather look at the stars." Jace chuckled. "Welcome to democracy. It is mostly arguing and bad coffee." Saris looked at him. The bruises on his face were fading to yellow. "Are you leaving?" she asked. The question was quiet, fragile. Jace looked down at his hands. "The Rustwing is fixed. The bounty is cleared. I even got a reward check big enough to buy a small planet." "So you are going?" Jace turned to face her. "I thought about it," he admitted. "I thought about taking the money and finding a nice, quiet rock on the rim where no one shoots at me." He reached out and took her hand. But I realized something. Quiet is boring, and I have gotten used to the noise. Sarah smiled, a radiant expression that made the nebula look dull in comparison. I am not an empress anymore. Jace, she said, I have no palace. I have no army. I am just a diplomat with a temper and a bio-neural condition. Good, Jace said, because I am not a fan of royalty. I am, however, a big fan of you. He stepped closer. The air between them hummed. It wasn't the dangerous, crackling static of the overload. It was a warm, steady resonance. You saved me, Jace, she whispered. In the dark, you connected to me when everyone else was afraid to touch. You saved yourself. Princess, Jace corrected gently. I just held the flashlight. He lifted his hand to her face, his thumb tracing the glowing line on her cheek. Can I kiss you? Jace asked. Saris laughed softly. You know, you do not have to ask every time. Yes, I do, Jace said seriously. Because it is your choice. Always. Saris looked at him. She thought about the cage she had lived in. She thought about the freedom she had fought for. And she thought about this man who had seen the weapon and loved the woman. She closed the distance. I choose you, she whispered. She kissed him. It was a slow, deep kiss, filled with the promise of 1,000 tomorrows, as they pulled apart, breathless. Saris's markings flared a bright, mischievous pink. Careful, human, she teased, her eyes sparkling. If you keep looking at me like that, my body might overload. Jace grinned, pulling her close again. Let it overload, he said. I have got a surge protector. They stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, laughter mingling with the silence of the void. Above them, the stars of Earth and Alara shone side by side, no longer enemies, just lights in the vast, beautiful dark.